This is Coach Lee, and you're listening to The Door Report.
Welcome back into The Door Report. We have a very special bonus edition of The Door Report today on Wednesday, September 24th, 2025. I'm, of course, Will Byrum, as always, joined by my co-host, Trevor Hulan. And we have a very special guest today on The Door Report for this bonus episode, Will Perdue, former Vanderbilt basketball legend, playing from 1983 to 1988 under head coach C.M. Newton. The 1988 SEC Player of the Year, as well as then went on to be the number 11 draft pick in the NBA draft in 1988, had a career with the Chicago Bulls, as well as stints with the Spurs and the Trailblazers. Will, thank you for taking the time with us here today to discuss some exciting things on the forefront for Vanderbilt basketball.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it. I use that term loosely, but I appreciate you guys making time for me, and I feel special that this is a bonus edition.
Yeah, we didn't want to get you lost in the shuffle. Right now during football season, our episodes are ranging anywhere from an hour and a half to over 2 hours. So we didn't want you to get lost in the middle of all the football talk. We wanted to have this separated out so that people would be sure to see it.
Well, football's rolling right now, so I understand.
Football is rolling. How have you had a chance to take in some of those games or get to First Bank yet this year?
I've not been to a game in person. I'm still living in Chicago. Unfortunately, my weekends have been kind of busy with my wife I'm an only child, but my wife comes from a big family, and she's one of 5. Her mom's one of 11. Her dad's one of 5, and, we're godparents, and there's a lot of nieces and nephews. So we're spending a lot of time at softball games, baseball games, football games, basketball games, volleyball games, any sport that you can come up with. I think we've been to, and I've also been to a couple of these weekend dance competitions. I've done a little bit of everything. So I was down in San Antonio last weekend, Atlanta with Barry Goheen, playing in the Naismith Golf Tournament. So unfortunately, my weekends have been a little busy, but I have had the ability to watch, and I will readily admit, and this is basically where, as we'll get into basketball, but for good reasons, we only watched till halftime this past weekend because it wasn't necessary to watch the second half. Usually, doing a 180, there were other reasons why we stopped watching at halftime. But now, since I didn't have a wager on the game, I didn't really find it necessary to watch the second half because I think that the outcome had already been determined. So I was already thinking ahead to Utah State and, God forbid, Clark hears this, but Alabama.
Yeah, Clark doesn't want to think about his players looking ahead or fans looking ahead past Utah State. But that's enough of this football talk. It's time to discuss what we're actually here to talk about, which is basketball. And we're inching towards the 2025-2026 Vanderbilt basketball season, of course. But we're here to discuss the Nashville Basketball Initiative. And we'll kind of start this off by, you obviously played, as I mentioned, kind of at the beginning, you played under C.M. Newton from 1983 to 1988. Those are the teams and around that time frame, those are the stories that we heard about growing up from our parents. Is that time frame of Vanderbilt basketball around when you were there and soon after you left? And clearly you still have a deep affinity for Vanderbilt basketball, something that keeps coming back. What was so special about Vanderbilt basketball and that program all the time at the time you were there that keeps you wanting to put Vanderbilt kind of at the forefront of your thoughts?
Well, it's as an individual, right? I think that, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I'm known as a basketball player. And as you get older, and I just turned 60 August 29th, you think about, your legacy. And this has kind of been a thought on my mind since, I kind of retired from the NBA is, what do you really want to be known for? Like I said, it's not a bad thing to be known as a former professional basketball player. My son thinks it's pretty cool. And he loves, when he gets to play me on NBA 2K, that's pretty cool. But, you kind of want to look back and you're like, what kind of impact, have I had on people's lives? And some people may say that's kind of morbid, but, it's just one of those things that you think about is, you get older. And I specifically remember, and I'm glad you brought up CM Newton. This is kind of where this is all coming from. I mean, CM was a guy that had unbelievable relationships with individuals, corporations, businesses. The term that's, everybody uses now, the sidewalk fan. He was out beating the streets. He was at Kiwanis luncheons. He was, going to McDonald's and meeting the old guys that sit there and have coffee and tell stories. And I mean, he was a salesman. He was constantly out generating interest, getting people to come to the arena. And, you mentioned fond memories. It's just the relationships that I built with my teammates and the Barry Goheen and a Steve Reese and a Barry Booker and, it's just Charlie Dahlem, who was a basketball manager, Frank Cornett, a teammate. We don't necessarily talk on a daily basis, but, the fond memories of the amount of time we spent together as individuals in the locker room, on the bus, on a plane, in hotel rooms, that's kind of where we were shaped as individuals and men, right? And I've always wanted to try to find a way to give back to Vanderbilt. And I'm going to be very transparent and more than just a way of where I, write a big fat check and step aside. I think personal time is valuable. A lot of people prefer just to write a check and step aside, but I think, because of, my name, the history, the struggles and the adversity I went through at Vanderbilt. I don't think a lot of people know this, but I literally almost flunked out. I think my GPA after my freshman year was below a 2.0. It might have been like a 1.7, 1.8. And a lot of that was because I was just a young kid without a lot of discipline, playing wiffle ball at 2 a.m. with other students because, we don't have athletic dorms at Vanderbilt. And I allowed the distractions to get the better of me. But I was very fortunate that CM stood in my corner and fought for me, because if it was up to the university, I probably wouldn't have been there my sophomore year. And all this stuff about Will Perdue and Vanderbilt would have never existed. It would have happened somewhere else. But because of CM and his affinity and love for Vanderbilt and, just who he was as a man outside of being such a great coach, he was that in turn, but just even the relationships he had with opposing coaches and the respect he had within the basketball community. I would love to kind of be that type of person for this program and Mark Byington going forward. As we got ready to go on the air, we talked about the story in, Sports Illustrated in regards to, some of the bullet points. And, one of the things that I will consistently say is that, when Jerry Stackhouse was initially named the coach, I was at the press conference, sitting next to Shane Foster. I talked to Jerry. I played against Jerry. I covered Jerry, when I was working for ESPN. And, a statement I made, in that article that I could kind of clarify here, and thank you guys for allowing me to do this, is I said, I tried to help. I didn't get anything in return, so I moved on. I wasn't seeking anything in return. I think the best way to clarify that is I didn't really get a response. I told Jerry I would try to help him any way I can. Here's my number. I called him. I left a message. Just maybe it's miscommunication. I mean, this isn't just Jerry's fault. I mean, I'm at fault as well. Both of us could have been more assertive, as far as how we handled it. But, I used the word disaster, and it just, unfortunately for Jerry, things didn't go well, and it just spiraled out of control. And, as it says in the article, I personally, as a former player, was heartbroken. How did we allow ourselves to get here? This never should have happened. And I want to put Mark in a position so that's not a case. I made a comment about making the NCAA tournaments low-hanging fruit. I think that should just be the norm moving forward, not an expectation, just the norm. That's where we start. Line 1, make the NCAA tournament. Line 2, get to the Sweet 16. Line 3, let's get ourselves to the Elite 8. Line 4, let's try to get to the Final 4. Line 5, put ourselves in a position to possibly, contend and compete for a national championship. It's a numbers game, right? And I said in that article, if we could really get 3 solid players, and all of a sudden, it's ironic that we're doing this podcast today because we just got that kid, Brown. Is that correct?
Anthony Brown.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I mean, he, in my opinion, and what I'm being told, could be counted on as one of those 3 type of guys you need. And then you build a team around that. And then, you hit the ground running. I think the one thing that Mark has done a really good job of is putting these teams together. The first team he put together, it took a while. It didn't always look pretty. But also it was an unprecedented tough league. And this year it's going to be the same. And, they were middle of the road. But middle of the road in the SEC is damn good. So I want to put Mark in a position in the men's basketball. And I'm very honest with this. If things go well and we can really grow this thing like we think we can, then we're also in with women's basketball as well. And we're not just talking about men's and women's basketball. We're talking about basketball, right? Mm-hmm. So, but it's baby steps. It's one step at a time. We've made a little progress, but we want to be able to put ourselves in a position that when Mark needs something, as I said in that article, whether it's maybe they need to endow another coaching position, they need to endow a manager's scholarship so we can, get a kid to commit to, sacrificing his time. Who knows what they need money and resources for, right? And at the end of the day, if there's, a kid that they got to pay a certain amount of money to and they don't necessarily have the money in the kitty, with NIL and rev share, then maybe he picks up the phone and says, hey, I need an extra X amount of dollars. And we can say, hey, we got you covered. But it's also about manpower too, getting the former players back on board, getting both feet and both hands and arms and getting yourself totally involved, with what's going on. Not, hey, I'm back, I'm watching on TV, but I'm from home. We need to get these guys in the gym. It's amazing how many former players live in Nashville but aren't season ticket holders and don't go to the games because of the frustration and the apathy that built up over those lean years. And a lot of guys are still waiting, taking that wait and see attitude. But I know it's, Mark's chipping away and it's slowly changing.
So it kind of sounds like, and we'll talk in more detail about the Nashville Basketball Initiative here. It sounds like you have a much better relationship and more open line of communication with Mark Byington than you did with the previous coach. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think, unfortunately for Mark, I've kind of forced myself on him, right? I probably text him too often. I probably call him too often. Eventually he gets back to me. But I think he appreciates what it is I'm trying to do. He may not necessarily always appreciate my aggressive nature, right? But he understands what I'm trying to do. And one of the last conversations I had with him is that he basically just said, we need help, right? And the biggest issue is that, when you talk about rev share, basketball gets 15%. That's technically $2.7 million. Well, we all know to compete in the SEC, your baseline has to be 5 to 6. That's your baseline. And then you got plenty of teams in the league that are paying a lot more than that. Right now, you don't always get a return on your investment, but you do have to put yourself in a position, to where you're in the ballpark, right? You're not going, hey, if we can just be 500 in the SEC, we'll get into the NCAA tournament, and then we'll see what happens. That's just, to me, that's the wrong attitude. It's the attitude of we want to put the best possible product on the floor and then go from there. But then it's also the thing of, okay, coach, I'm all in. I love what you're saying, right? I can't sleep at night. I'm excited. But be careful what you ask for, because when you get it, now all the pressure is on you, right? You've eliminated all your excuses, and that's what I would love to do. But I think what we saw last year and what he's been able to do from recruiting, he's a hell of a recruiter, and I think he's a hell of a coach. The hardest thing that you try to do at any level is try to get these guys to understand the meaning and the importance of sacrifice, whether it's sacrificing points for the better of the team, minutes for the better of the team and wins. It's not just about you. And that's what I always tell people. If you don't want to be a team player and you don't want to play a team sport, you can go play golf. You can go play tennis. There's plenty of individual sports you can be involved in, to where you don't have to make any sacrifices, right? But that's another thing that I really learned from CM and John Bostic and Ed Martin was they hammered that home about the ability to make sacrifices, trust your teammates. If Barry Goheen or Barry Booker or Derek Wilcox miss a three, that doesn't mean they're going to miss the next one. You got to trust them and still throw it back out when the double team comes.
So kind of getting to the Nashville Basketball Initiative, I think our listeners are, and your passion is extremely evident for Vanderbilt basketball, and we deeply appreciate that, and we need more of that from Vanderbilt graduates, especially Vanderbilt stars coming back and supporting programs across all sports. But just generally, I know you've kind of hit on it a little bit, the Nashville Basketball Initiative. What is the goal in the end? Is it supplementing the pre-existing NIL collective and Anchor Impact and Rev Share? Or is it getting more involvement of alumni and kind of a grassroots build of the fan base and growth of the fan base? Is it funds based? What is the kind of business proposal, business statement of the Nashville Basketball Initiative?
Listen, it's all the above, quite honestly. I've said, and I mentioned it in the article, that we look at the Nashville Basketball Initiative kind of like Aflac. From an NIL standpoint, let me just talk about NIL for a minute. Back to, you have 20.5 million. Football gets 75 million, or maybe it's 20 million, but football gets 75%. I know they wish they got 75 million, but they get 75% of that. Basketball gets 15. Men's basketball gets 15. That basically is approximately $2.75 million, right? To disperse amongst 12 to 14 players. Well, as I said, we know that's not enough. And Mark needs help to raise money beyond the 2.75. And third-party entities, which we are allowed to do that. We're not doing anything illegal. We're very transparent. We're above board. We're going to stay above board, and we're going to follow the rules that change by the day, by the way. So we're constantly having to keep up with that. But it is, if Mark, let me just, I don't want people to freak out, but let's just say, Mark can add a really good player at the last second for $1 million to the roster. And he feels like that player is going to push him into now Elite 8 territory, Sweet 16 territory, not just NCAA territory. But yet he goes and looks in the kitty and he realizes, we only have, 800,000. I need another 200,000. Where are we going to get this from? Let's call my guys at the Nashville Basketball Initiative and see what they've got. And coach, we've got enough. We got that covered. Okay. So that's kind of where we would help out with the NIL. We're on top of, Rev Share, because every coach you talk to within the SEC or a Power 5 conference, let's not even talk about what the Big East is spending, because they don't have to worry about football. Let's just talk about, on average, what teams are spending in the SEC. That's 5 to 6 million. So you're 2.5 to 3.5 million more than what Rev Share is on top of Rev Share. So we would want to be able to, if we can grow as we think we can, and we can provide that occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally, right? But at the same time now, I got to get guys back into the fold as far as former players from all eras. I've gotten a pretty good response, and I'm not trying to attack anybody or any era, right? But I've gotten a really good response from guys, that have played in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I need to get the guys that played in 2000 and beyond, that just graduated 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I got to get these guys back on board, right? It's a numbers game. So that we start, one of the things you talk about CM Newton, I remember at every single practice, you would look over in the stands, and then in that corner where, you would come in and out of the gym, go up and down the steps. Every single practice, there would be 15 to 20, whether it's alumni, whether it's, supporters, whether it's personal friends of CM, 15 to 20 people every single day would be there to watch practice. I'm not sure there's anybody that shows up, unless I or Robert Sampson bring them to practice, shows up at practice right now for Mark and the team. And by the way, practice officially started Monday for that 42-day period leading up to the first game. So we got to make sure that happens, right? I mentioned about endowing a coaching position. If maybe Mark's like, listen, I need another guy, I need an analytics guy, or I need this guy, whatever it may be. I don't know. Maybe he needs a personal assistant outside of the one he already has, but he needs help. We want to be able to step up and provide anything and everything that he may need. But at the same time, we want the current players, right, to be able to look over their shoulder and see hundreds of former players in line, not look around and see one or two guys, right? I know everybody thinks they're going to play in the NBA. Everybody thinks they're going to play professionally. But there's a reason why the NCAA puts those commercials out there that how many college athletes actually go to play at the next level? 1%. So what's 1% of 12 guys? Right? I understand these guys are going to go where they get paid. But at the end of the day, once they've gotten paid and then their college career is over, they're never going to make that amount of money again. But then they better start asking themselves, what am I going to do next? What's plan B? And we want to make sure that at the same time, current players and future players understand, if I go to Vanderbilt, they'll take care of me. And I don't mean money under the table, cars, stuff like that. I mean, if your dream doesn't come true to play in the NBA, we got you, because A, you got a degree, B, you've got this alumni support, C, we can promise you're going to end up with a really good job. We want to be able to fulfill that need as well. But also, it's a constant entertainment game. And they may need money to entertain some alumni when they go down to the Georgia game or go down to the Alabama game or the LSU game, because people that want to give to NIL, people that want to give to the Nashville Basketball Initiative, outside of personal satisfaction, they're going to ask, what's in it for me? What am I getting from this? Do I get to meet the coach? Do I get to go to practice? Do I get to fly on the team? There's so many things that we can do that are within the rules that Mark may need some help with. Where they're playing a really important, road game down in Starkville, Mississippi. Well, all of a sudden the Nashville Basketball Initiative jumps up. We start making phone calls. We get a bunch of guys that want to go down there, maybe go hit the casinos while we're there. There's a lot of fun things to do. But now all of a sudden we've made this an important game. And then all of a sudden the guys run out on the floor and there's 50, 60 Vanderbilt fans there that normally wouldn't be there. But because of the Nashville Basketball Initiative, we've created that interest, that demand, and people want to support the team. And that's, I understand it. I've said a lot and there's many facets, but that's the whole thing. I just want to make sure people understand this isn't just about NIL. This is about doing what's necessary, whether it's financial, whether it's, we just need your time as an individual. We need you at the games. We want to take you to practice. Let these kids know that we actually care about them, as humans and not just as basketball players. And all of a sudden, now, as many fans complain, well, there's no loyalty. They're one and done. That is true. But I think a lot of coaches, and I know Mark does, they have visions of being able to find these players that want to be at Vanderbilt for more than a year. Now, that takes a little development, but I think Mark's staff has done an excellent job of developing in the short period of time that they've been there. And I think they will continue to do so. And we want to be able to make that easier for them.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of the questions that I had honestly written down here in that. And then I love everything you said, all of the alumni involvement, all of that. I do have to ask kind of a more difficult question here, because I think it's a question that has often been brought up on our message board and from listeners when we've mentioned the Nashville Basketball Initiative in the past. That is, Vanderbilt has the Anchor Impact Collective in place, and you can go on there and you can donate money to Anchor Impact. What is the pitch or the selling point that differentiates the NBI from Anchor Impact? It doesn't have to be negative or anything like that, but fans kind of know what Anchor Impact is. What is the pitch that put your dollars into the NBI versus putting those dollars into Anchor Impact that kind of has a more proven track record behind it right now?
Because for me, we are and will continue to be very, very transparent. We're going to tell you and be able to tell you where every single penny goes. Okay? And as I mentioned from the beginning, right now, this is just about men's basketball. So when you get involved, this is about men's basketball. We're hoping that if we can grow this like we think we can, and Mark continues to have the success he's having, Shay continues to have the success that she's having, we will then have enough resources, because right now we just don't have enough resources, right? We're hoping to get to that point that then we can also now bring women's basketball into the fold. And we're just talking about Vanderbilt basketball and not two separate divisions. We're just talking about Vanderbilt basketball, period. But also at the same time, we're talking about social events that, whether it's watch parties. And I know that, and let me just back up for a second. I don't know where Anchor Impact goes from here because, of the rule changes that were established on July 1st. But we are a third-party entity. We are not part of Vanderbilt. We're here to support Vanderbilt. And the main thing is that now, as we get myself and former players involved, I want the sidewalk fan to know that they are very important to us. This isn't about just going out and getting the big fish, right? As we've started to put this out there and be more present on social media, become more aggressive and reach out to more people, we've heard these stories about how people grew up in Memorial Gymnasium, right? And watched fabulous basketball. And even when I got to Vanderbilt and stepped foot on campus in 1983, I think my freshman year, we had a losing record, but it was still sold out every night, right? It was an event. It was something you went to, and not to be seen, but to really sit down and enjoy what was being presented in front of you, and that was basketball played the right way. And a entertaining, hard-nosed, physical, fans didn't walk out of the gym questioning whether we played hard or not. A lot of times we just got beat because of our opponent was better. But as people like me and Barry Goheen and Derek Wilcox and Scott Drought, and the list goes on and on and on, as the quality of the player got better, Vanderbilt as a whole got better, and the product on the floor got better. And I want people to understand that by jumping on board and getting on this train, you now will be a part of that. You will be somebody that has, developed that. You'll be responsible for that product. And we want to get all these people together, from alumni to Nashville supporters to the sidewalk fan. And I honestly, some people will not like this statement, but if you're a Vanderbilt fan, except when they play Tennessee, we'll still take you, right? And you're a Vanderbilt fan because you live in Nashville, but for some reason you love Tennessee. That's okay, right? I'm not going to scold you for doing that, right? But I know some people don't.
We might
Yeah.
over here, but you don't have to.
Yeah,
scold
you
them.
don't have to.
them
We'll
for
scold
you.
them though.
Right. But yet we still need them in that gymnasium when they're playing LSU, when they're playing Alabama, so because every seat that we put in there that's a Vanderbilt fan, that's fewer seats for our opponent. I know last year, that they put a better product on the floor, but you still had a lot of Kentucky fans in the building. You still had a lot of Tennessee fans in the building. I want us to get back to the point where when, somebody asks, do you want to sell your ticket to the Tennessee game? The answer is hell no. And it's not because I don't want to make, 3 times my money. It's because I want to be there when we whip Tennessee's ass or we whip Kentucky's ass. Because then now this is the expectation on a nightly basis. And that's, to me, is the reason amongst many why you should jump on board with the Nashville Basketball Initiative in order to make sure that we put Coach Byington and his staff in the position to where at the end of the day, he gets what he needs. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to X's and O's only. Because right now, I think we can say it's more than just X's and O's. Other universities have more money. They have more resources. We need to step it up and help the university and the athletic department as a whole get to that point.
So right now, a lot of the messaging has been to alumni, and we'll close it out here in a second. This has been great. We often get told that when people watch our podcast, that our passion for Vanderbilt seeps through the screen, and that's why people return and listen. Your passion for Vanderbilt basketball certainly seeps through the screen right now during this interview. But right now, you have a lot of the sidewalk fans. That is our audience, is the sidewalk fan, the person that is extremely passionate, is everywhere. If they are inspired by what you've said so far about the Nashville Basketball Initiative, how can they support the Nashville Basketball Initiative today? What can they do to support the NBI?
Well, the first thing you can do now is you get on the social media with, our X account, and track it down. And
it is at Nashville NBI.
Right.
At Nashville NBI on Twitter.
And that's where, it starts right there. And, we've started, we're now doing the media push. And also be very clear, we've been crawling. We haven't been walking. We haven't been running. I was a little ignorant in the sense that, I just figured, hey, let's just start this thing and we're going to kill it. Right. And I faced a lot of resistance from numerous directions, a lot of apathy. Now, winning cures all ills, and Mark's helped do that. And I think that you guys have dealt with, as you say, these are all sidewalk fans. These are the people that really are the backbone of Vanderbilt, right? I remember as a player, right, when I played and I'd run into people at Wendy's of all places, because that was right there on the corner of campus, right? They would talk about how they would go to the games, and more importantly, they loved the fact that, as a family of 4, they could actually afford to go. And, I know things are a little more expensive now, but it's still the best deal in town. And I know there's the Titans. I know you have the Predators. You got professional.
We got soccer.
You have professional women's basketball as well in the summer, right? There's a lot going on. But at the end of the day, if you want to see the best basketball in town, and, again, as soon as you say these words, everybody's like, oh, you're being disrespectful. I'm not being disrespectful to Belmont or Lipscomb. They put a really nice brand of basketball on the floor. But if you want to go out and watch the guys that are going to play at the next level, you're only going to see that in Memorial Gymnasium. Boom. And that's where I think you're going to be about as close to professional as you can. And there's no better basketball in the country right now, no better league than the SEC. I know some people are probably going to shake their head and laugh when I say this, but as we speak today, September 24th, I understand it's football season, but let's talk about 12 teams made it to the NCAA last year?
I think that's right.
Yeah. 13, I believe.
13.
13. I believe it was 13.
Okay. 75% of the league, right? Maybe more. Maybe that's 80%. I don't know. I have to do my math, but you could have an argument and a discussion. Is it really a football league right now, or is it a basketball league? I know it's known for football, and I know the ratings for football are off the charts. But when you talk about quality from the best team to the team at the bottom of the barrel, per se, air quotes, is there a stronger league from top to bottom? No. I mean, it's unprecedented, and I think this year they're going to be just as strong as last year. And, like I said, some people are always going to talk about the strength, but the one thing you can say about the SEC basketball wise, it's not top heavy. It's heavy from top to bottom. And that's why at the end of the day, this NBI is so important, in my opinion, because you can't afford to fall behind. I mean, it's an uphill battle as it is, but if you start to fall behind from a talent standpoint, from a financial standpoint, it may take 3 or 4 years to honestly recover because of how good the league is as a whole.
Yeah, Will, thank you for your time. I've been taking a lot of this information in. I really only have one question. So you spoken about financials, the goal of NBI. What I found really interesting was your desire to get fan interaction and fan support back in the Memorial Gymnasium. Because Will and I both grew up Vanderbilt fans. My dad went to games from the 70s all the way till now, and I've heard the stories of how crazy Memorial Gymnasium could be. Now, we know that before Mark Byington, during the Stackhouse era, it was upsetting. It was sad. It was bad basketball to watch. I could understand why fans didn't want to get involved and go to Memorial Gymnasium and watch those games. However, this past season, we saw, in recent memory, pretty unprecedented success from Vanderbilt basketball compared to what we've been seeing. And still the fan support, particularly from the older fans, the fans that sit right on the base, the fans that sit right on the court, don't get as involved. Don't stand up and cheer. Don't get excited. Even whenever there's a fast break dunk, just kind of sit on their hands. What does NBI have any plans to not only address the sidewalk fans and get them excited, but also address those fans that grew up watching Scott Stroud, Mike Rhodes play basketball and still go to Memorial Gymnasium, but in all seriousness, don't treat it like an SEC basketball game?
No, Trevor, you're exactly right. And you made let's be very honest here, right? I mean, some people ask for honesty, but then they don't like what they hear, right? Mm-hmm. Those people you're talking about, at some point in their career, they were huge supporters of the program. They were on their feet. They were cheering. Now, I'm not saying that this in a negative fashion, but as you talk about, most of those people that are sitting in those seats with the backs on them, they're older, right? We need to start doing a better job as a whole of really getting out there and beating the streets and getting the younger fan involved. And I mean, like, getting into the elementary schools and the junior highs and being like, hey, you want to be a Vanderbilt fan. This player, that player, right? That's where it starts. You said grassroots, right? There's some people that I've been talking to with these phone calls and these dinners and everything that they're just like, it's in their blood. And they'll say, I've taken a beating over the last couple of years. I'm emotionally drained, right? But at the same time, we want to make sure their kids are Vanderbilt fans because of, as your statement exactly, my dad was going in the 70s. So you became a fan because of your dad, right? What does everybody talk about fond memories? I remember watching, whether it was the Cowboys or whoever. I mean, I grew up in Florida, and my dad and I used to go to Miami Dolphins. We'd drive 4 hours each way because we had season tickets to the Miami Dolphins because at the time, that was the only NFL team in the state of Florida, right? I want people to have that same passion for Vanderbilt, and that starts with, the kids. We're in the process of working with a couple businesses within Nashville that are big with the school board to try to how do we develop that interest? How do we, kind of switch the dynamic and the average age of the Vanderbilt fan, right? And that just kind of leads from one era to another. That's part of it as well. It's not just, hey, as you just pointed out, let's take that older fan in 2C and make sure that, they get up and they cheer. But let's also be very clear too, Trevor. We also, and I was part of this, right? When we were beating Indiana, we were beating North Carolina, kids, the students had to spend the night out by Surratt in order to sit in line and get tickets because there was only 2,000 available. I don't want to have to give away pizza or T-shirts or sombreros or cowboy hats or whatever it is to get students to come to the game. And we damn well don't want them leaving at halftime either.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where, now I'm going to date myself really bad here, but go back and look at those yearbooks of, now the league doesn't want students storming the floor, but there's pictures of Barry Goheen being, carried off the floor on regular students. And now those students happen to be football players off the floor because he hit one of his 6 or 7 game winners, against somebody, throughout his career. But that's where we want that to be a desired ticket, from the student section on one side to the season ticket holders on the other to the sidewalk fan. We basically, and this is kind of an interesting statement, but we basically want to be able to support the ticket scalpers to where they're back to making money again, and not just because they're selling tickets to Kentucky fans or Tennessee fans or LSU fans or Alabama fans because they know they can come to Nashville and get a ticket and watch their team play on the road where maybe they can't do it at home.
Well, Will, we really appreciate your time here today, kind of elaborating on everything the Nashville Basketball Initiative is doing. Once again, your passion for Vanderbilt seeps through the screen. I think Vanderbilt fans and listeners to the Door Report are going to absolutely love this interview.
Mm-hmm.
You can follow the Nashville Basketball Initiative on Twitter/X at Nashville NBI. Will, do you have any last words for the Door Report listeners out there before we close it out?
Yeah, and actually, I kind of wrote this down so I could say it properly, and I apologize, for reading this, but I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due, okay? Football has shown when things align in a moment that big things can happen. The next step for the Nashville Basketball Initiative is when this does happen, and we're in this point now, we're starting to make the big media push to make it happen. We need to make sure it repeats itself and it's just not a one-off, right? And we need to make sure that this program is resourced for success, and that's sustained success. And even if Mark leaves for whatever reason, he leaves behind a program in good standing. So the next coach that comes along, and I'm not saying he's leaving. I don't want people to freak out, right? I don't want people to freak out. Okay.
You've already got the message board freaking out. So,
but maybe the NBA comes calling. I don't know. But I'm just saying, right? We want to make sure that program is in great standing from this point forward. We saw the improvement that football made last year. We saw the improvement that basketball had made last year. And we want to do what's ever necessary within the rules, right? Above board to keep it going. The football team has shown what is possible, and now they're 3-0. We all fully expect them to go 4-0. And, it's been nice to see them live up to expectations. And I think that we want to be in that position to where, Vanderbilt is in the same position that the football team is in from a basketball standpoint. And I put it this way. I was talking to somebody within the football program. You've made headway when you go to media days and some of the Alabama players are actually talking about Vanderbilt. So we want to make sure that we get to the point where when you go to media days for the basketball season, the other opponents are talking specifically about Vanderbilt because of how well they've now turned things around, how well this team plays, how hard this team plays, the success that they start to build up year after year. Because I think we all agree, right? If there is a sport, and Tim Corbin he's on an island by himself. I'm not even going to compare anybody to baseball, right? He's just on an island by himself. But the blueprint's right there in front of you. And he started it, right? But if there is a sport, just because of the numbers, you got 12 guys on a team, you really need 3 really good players. And then you can build a team around them really easy. And that's, to me, is a sustainable formula with help from all angles.
Well, Will, this has been great. I
Mm-hmm.
think people are going to absolutely love this. So we're going to close it out here, and I appreciate that final message. So for myself, Will Byrum, my co-host Trevor Hulan, and our very special guest, you got one more thing?
No, I just want to thank you guys for what you do because, through the lean years, you probably weren't getting a lot of listeners.
That's the truth.
No.
You guys have been true to what your goal was. You guys, this is a passion. This isn't just a job. You guys have been persistent. You guys have been patient. And now you're just riding the wave. And I just want to say continued success and thank you guys so much for allowing me to come on and talk about this.
Well,
yeah, thank you.
Really,
we should be thanking you,
yeah.
the legend.
Yeah, really appreciate
Well, I think
your
we can
work.
say a friend of mine used to talk about you got to make sure everything in your life is a win-win. Can't just be one-sided. So I think this is a win-win for all three of us.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
Absolutely. And I'll close it out here again. Once again, I'm still Will Byrum. This is still Trevor Hulan. And a big thank you to our very special guest, Will Perdue. This has been a very special bonus episode edition of The Door Report. Everybody out there, anchor down.